The biggest difference is the amount of context that we have about the user. I mean, the mobile device really is one of the most personal computers that exist out there. You oftentimes don't share it with your spouse or your friends. It's really uniquely yours in many cases. So the amount of things that happen on the device and the amount of information that app developers can get from those devices is pretty stellar. And then of course just the sheer fact that the app developers have a lot of different signals coming in. They can get latitude and longitude. They can get the speed at which you're moving in many cases. They can get what time of day it is as you're doing those queries. So you can take all those very interesting signals that come in from a mobile device and really do different types of searches in many cases and different types of answers than you would say on a desktop where it may be shared or it's not moving obviously in most cases. And so that's the biggest difference, is that notion of context about the user that you have when using when writing applications for a mobile device. Well, with Bing in particular, we've got a really cool mapping application built into the app, right? And so obviously very standard stuff there. We can plot where you are in the map and give you great directions and that sort of thing. But we're also looking at ways to say, okay, knowing that you're right here, what are the things around you? What are the categories of things around you? So if you're dying for a cup of coffee this morning, which I am, coincidentally, I could easily pop open the Bing map, find myself on that map, hit a button, and see all the different cafes that may be serving a great cup of coffee right around me. Fairly, I mean, in that case, fairly simple stuff. I think it gets more interesting the further down the tail you go with geolocation. Certainly, that's an interesting question. So certainly the ability for us to tune the auto-suggestions based on your physical location is actually a pretty interesting concept. I mean, certainly, you're right, that the number is about 32% I think right now we see of people who issue a query from the home screen actually do so via auto-suggest. But you can really imagine, now that we know where you're at, let's tune the auto-suggestion to be smarter. Not even just necessarily geolocation. Think time of day, for example, right? So if you're doing a query for traffic, as an example, and it's 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, likely the proper response to that is going to be the traffic conditions on the road, not the band from the 70s, who had a few hits back then. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you love traffic all the time, but there you go. But that's an example of how we can start tuning that auto-suggest and the actual answers we give based on those signals we're getting. Yeah, well, the Bing box actually was just a code name we had internally that I talked about and then got picked up in the press. So no, it's fine, it's fine. But the idea really is that we want to, I mean, we have a ton of technology at our disposal. I mean, there's so much out there and so many smart people working on this. The question we asked ourselves was, does it make sense to always bring back the same type of results for every single query? And it doesn't. I mean, there are certain types of queries, great navigational queries, or people queries or place queries, where we actually have a ton of information about that particular entity or particular object. So if you search for, David Beckham, for example, why should we give you back a bunch of links that talk about David Beckham? The more appropriate thing to do would to actually bring back some kind of structured card or some kind of structured box that has photos, and we know who he is. I mean, that's a pretty unambiguous query, right? So we know that he's a soccer player, a football player. We know he's married to whoever it is, Spice Posh or something, right? Victoria Beckham. Thank you, Victoria Beckham, right? And we know all these different things about him. Why can't we bring more of that knowledge to the top of the page or somewhere on the page in a very clear area, rather than make the user have to do all that sorting through links to find what they may be looking for? So that's the idea behind the answer we have there. I think the challenge that we have, and that all engines are going to have, is that users don't necessarily want to have to specify that now I'm looking for shopping, now I'm looking for travel, now I'm looking for local. The challenge, and I think the fun part of what we do at Bing, and I'm sure what other folks do across their engines, is to try to figure out the intent of the query. So again, if I'm looking for, again, digital cameras, for an example, right? We know from all the query logs that generally people, when they issue that query, are looking to either research a product or to buy a product. They aren't generally looking for a Wikipedia article on digital cameras. And so the opportunity that engines have is to look at that, try to understand the intent of that particular query, and then pivot that user experience around the knowledge that makes the most sense. So it's, to answer your question directly, it's almost like vertical search. We should stop thinking about search as general versus vertical. I think that the way users think about it is, I do a search, you tell me the best way to get that knowledge. And it might be a vertical search experience that we deliver right into our standard search experience, basically.